Welcome back. As we've discussed in the introduction, as our applications go from simple text-based websites to video websites like YouTube or even games, you can imagine that we are now shipping more and more JavaScript than ever before to our client or our browser. And you remember how an application looked when we worked with React, right? On our HTML page, we just had one simple element. We had the div tag with an ID of root. And React just attached itself to that ID root element and then rendered all the HTML through React elements just through that one div tag in HTML. And this is how client-side rendered apps work. You see, unlike server-side rendering, where the server responds with a fully loaded HTML page that's ready to be rendered to the user, with client-side rendering, it gets a pretty bare-bones HTML page that links to your JavaScript files, which have to be executed and downloaded. We see over here that we first request our HTML, and while we do that, we have a loading spinner or a blank page as we wait for something to be rendered on the browser. Once the HTML file arrives, we notice some JavaScript files. And because there's nothing really to be rendered, we wait for the JavaScript files to be downloaded. We then wait for them to be evaluated. And then finally, while we're still watching this loading screen, once all of that is done, our page loads up and becomes interactive and we can see it. Now, the one benefit of this, although we do have to wait a bit, is that once this page becomes interactive, if you were to click on a link on this page to load more content, the browser doesn't have to make another request to the server. You're rendering items within the browser through React, through logic, through JavaScript. So using JavaScript, it's going to load new content and new libraries and new views to the web page. And this is much faster since you're only loading a very small section of the new page. So for example, if we had a menu bar at the top, that doesn't need to be re-rendered. We can just re-render whatever perhaps the profile is underneath. Just like if you remember in our product hunt example, only parts of the web page get loaded, and that's a lot faster. Now, there's also a problem here, right? With client-side rendering, you sometimes have these blank pages where people just put loading spinners or a blank page while we wait for this initial rendering to happen. Let's see what server-side rendering would look like. With server-side rendering, things look a little bit different. Immediately, you can see that with SSR, it renders a lot faster on the initial request compared to the client-side rendered, which we had to wait a little bit more. Because our server now responds with a fully rendered page so that we can display something to the user while the JavaScript gets downloaded and evaluated in the background. But you do also notice that our page doesn't become interactive until this point, until these two steps by JavaScript get run. So we still have the same interactivity point. The only difference is that to the user, this website appears a lot faster because it displays things on the page a lot faster. They have less time watching the loading spinner. All right, well, there's our decision. Looking at these two, it's clear we need to do server-side rendering. Let's scrap all our client-side rendering projects. Everything we have learned up until now, it's all a waste. All right, hold on. That's not actually complete or right. As with anything, there are pros and cons to everything. And before we get into when you'd want to do client-side rendering, when you'd want to do server-side rendering, let's take a break because I'm sure you have a question now. Can we turn a single page application into a server-side rendered application? Can we make our RoboFriends app into a server-side rendered app? Is that even possible? Because you can see how easy it is to do if you just had simple HTML pages. But if you had a dynamic web app, like a single page application, then it might be a little bit more difficult. So I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.